Why is it important to talk about the policing of Black women and children through the child welfare system? I'm here with Erin Cloud from BronxDefenders.org, and I'm Kathy Bartoli from the IntimacyDojo.com. And Erin, you're going to be talking about this at the Woodhull Sexual Freedom Summit. Such an important topic, and I'd love to hear, can you give us some juicy details from your talk or from your work?
Absolutely. It's an incredibly important topic that's really not discussed frequently or openly amongst many people, even people who care and are well-intended. What we're going to be talking about in our presentations is the womb to foster care pipeline. So our managing director, Emma Kettingham at Bronx Defenders, kind of coined this term womb to foster care pipeline because what we were seeing was that women, low-income women, Black women, Latinx women, were hiding their pregnancies in fear that their children were going to be removed. And this was a well-founded fear that their children were going to be removed from them at birth because they had systemic involvement with the foster care system. So if they had a prior child that was in foster care, used to be in foster care, then they were more likely to lose their child at childbirth and almost immediately lose their child at childbirth. Not even more likely, they actually was a guaranteed fact that would happen.
Oh my God.
And so our office wanted to intervene and create a solution that would help these women keep their children in a way that was centered in Black women, centered in women of color, centered in their voices, and not in a model that was steeped in patriarchy and white supremacy that is largely dripping within the foster care system as of present.
Yeah, and oh my God, if they're having to hide it so they can keep their child, they're not getting the resources. You can't go and ask for help, the help that our culture, we're supposed to offer them. They couldn't even ask for that. That'd be so awful.
Exactly. I mean, when we're looking at a reproductive justice model, we're thinking, what is your right to have a child if you choose to have a child, and your right to be able to parent that child free from government intrusion, your right to choice. And a lot of times what we were seeing is that people's conversations ended at birth. There was a lot of conversation about access to choice, but not as much conversation about how that access to choice and then your right to actually parent the child and how those things were interconnected with each other in the fight for reproductive liberty for all women, especially women of color.
Wow, that's real. Thank you for doing this work. No one should have to be afraid that because of something that happened in the past or some other decisions that they would automatically lose their child. That's just not okay.
It's absolutely not okay, and especially when you consider the fact that places like the South Bronx, which is the poorest congressional district of the nation, have so many other intersecting systems that place Black women at risk. They're more likely to be arrested. They're facing they're more likely to be incarcerated due to the policing systems that are in our society. Because they are low income and they are in shelters when they're chronically homeless, because we have a homeless issue in New York City, they're more likely to live amongst mandated reporters in their shelters. If they're receiving benefits, they're going to receive those benefits from an HRI worker that's also a mandated reporter. So their life is surrounded by all these different policing units that sometimes we don't even consider to be policing units. And so they're living under a microscope. And as you can imagine, as women, we make mistakes, live our lives, but if you're under a microscope, those mistakes are amplified in a way that are incredibly punitive for women of color in a way that can be scary to judgment in the child welfare system.
Yeah, I mean, I think about occasionally everyone's tired and they don't judge the light right, and they go drive through the light when it's really magenta or red. Right. And most people are like, oh, that happened, and if I get caught, I have a fine I can pay, or hopefully I won't get caught. But if someone's watching you all the time and you're always caught, it's like you suddenly look like a very bad driver.
Correct. And then when you combine that with our historical view of Black women as being inferior, when you look at kind of stigmas that have been developed by concepts of the welfare queen that really trace back to legacies of slavery, of oppression, that allows our families as Black women to be entered and dismantled in ways that white women don't have to face, and they don't have to face the same stereotypes. So when you add, the reasons why that Black women are over policed with a very real and persistent stigmatization of our own bodies and who we are as women, it makes us particularly vulnerable. And it makes us especially vulnerable when we need to seek treatment and support for our bodies and for ourselves. And what we saw is that many of our clients And these women, they didn't want to seek prenatal care from their doctors because they didn't feel like they could openly and candidly have trusting relationships with those doctors. Because if they told them, hey, I have a partner and, it's sometimes violent and I'm scared, that could be a report that's called in against them. If they, talked about substance use with their doctor, they weren't receiving treatment. They were receiving calls to child protective workers, and all of that put them in situations where they were hiding important parts of their own health during their pregnancies because they wanted to survive birth with a child. And that was the only thing they were considering, is like, how can I leave this situation at birth with the baby that I want to care for in my life? And so if you can't leave your birth with a baby, your access to, real fundamental choice is limited. In fact, it's non-existent. And we're not really looking at this right to parent for women who choose to parent in a productive or meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can't get the help they need to actually do a better job, like getting prenatal care, or, making sure the tests are all done to make sure all the needs are met for the baby. That's what a horrible place to be, where there's no good choice to make. There's no safe way to move forward.
No, and when we're looking at instances of mortality and morbidity rates for Black women, this is a contributing factor. If you are looking at your childbirth and thinking, all I want to do is leave with this child, which is biologically important, right? Like, that's our first instinct as a parent, is that you want your child to survive, mm-hmm. and you want to care for that child. And you're not thinking, like, how am I feeling right now? What is going on in my body? Am I healing? How am I listening to myself? And so some of the things that we've seen, and my colleague who's going to be presenting with me, Melissa Hamilton, who actually just gave birth, which is why she's not here, mm-hmm. Talks about the fact that women are frequently given C-sections, and they're not going back to treatment for C-sections because that relationship that doctors broken. They are sitting in court for multiple days at a time on hard benches, not having any consultation or any consideration about their health, with infected C-section scars, infected healing. They're not given the opportunity to breastfeed their children. They're told they can't breastfeed their children. Even for drugs like marijuana, they're not given pumps to pump with at all. There's just no integrity to their relationship with their child, because really it exemplifies a concept of they're bad mom, you don't deserve your child. And what we know is that's simply not true.
Just normal childbirth, it's a stressful time. It's like your body's going through all these changes. You're dealing with a lot of stresses on your body and fears. To add all that on top, it would just, that's, I don't even have words for it. Like, nobody should, it's not human. We treat animals better than that.
We honestly do. The way that we would never think about, when I adopted a dog, they would not let me adopt a puppy mm-hmm. within the first 6 weeks. They said, this puppy needs to be with the mom. There's no way they would separate the puppy from the mom. Yeah. It's actually, we gave a lot of value to that. But yet, for a mother, when they give birth and they're low income and they live in communities like the South Bronx, they remove those babies from birth. They separate them from their mothers. They are entitled in New York to twice weekly visits, so 2 hours per week to see an infant.
All the attachment theories and everything out there, like, they need that bonding. Like, the very instant they're born, you're supposed to put them on the mom and let the mom hold the baby, and like, that's so critical.
And it's so critical for the child's development. It's critical for our clients' development with their child. It's critical to creating that dyad, that attachment bond that's going to keep the family healthy and strong moving forward. And the reality is that there's a presumption and there is an assumption and a negative perception about who our clients are, that many people are trying to get them to attach to other people, or they're not considering the loss that this child will have by losing our client as a mother.
Oh, yeah. Wow, I am so honored to hear. Like, thank you for all the work and energy you put into this. This is so important, and more people need to hear about it. I think the more awareness, the more likely people are to say, no, this is not okay. We need to do something. You're going to speak at Woodhull about this, and I'm so glad your voice is there. Could you tell me why do you choose Woodhull as one of your venues for sharing this?
So we really want to be in spaces that are reproductive justice models and talking about the framework, because I think often I am a public defender and I represent women in the child welfare system, and very often these different arenas are very segmented: reproductive justice, public health, and criminal justice.
But they're really all blended together.
They're not blending all together, but the reality is that we're looking at the same woman. This woman is going through all these different systems, and she's one person, but we're all sitting in silo talking about these issues. And what I wanted to do, and what our office wanted to do, is make sure that the voices of these women are centered within these conversations. Because so often when we're thinking about reproductive justice, the conversation really focuses on abortion, right to choose, and it doesn't really talk about what's happening with many of our clients, which is the oppression that child protective workers are placing on their actual autonomous birthing and choice and ability to procreate and have children. And for many of my clients, that really is a government form of oppression to their own procreation and liberties and thereof.
Well, and I mean, I'm not an expert on this at all, but even in my areas where I work, I see so much unconscious bias and microaggressions that people aren't even aware they're doing. They think they're doing something to help, and they're actually perpetuating the very thing they want to not have happen. Like, they're not aware of where they're coming from. So education is, it's got to get out there.
And we see that. We see, Dorothy Roberts published in her book, As Shattered Bonds, this conversation about the fact that at every point of decision making with a child protective worker, there is not only a place of bias, but there is statistical basis to say that every decision they're making is biased. And it's not just the child protective workers. We know that from hospital reporting. The hospitals report women who use substances that are in low income communities and are Black at higher rates than white women. We know, and we have lessons that we've learned from the criminal justice system, that we know that drug use is something that is not at as equivalent use within white communities, if not more use within white communities.
But who goes to prison?
Correct. And it's like, and when you're looking at places like New York City, who is going into foster care? We don't see white children at the same rates that we see Black children in foster care. And we know that we see Black children, especially in places like New York City, disproportionately represented in the foster care system.
Well, in foster care, at least from my experiences with it, when I was young, we brought in 2 foster boys into our home, and the stories I've heard since, there's a lot of problems within the foster care system. It's not the safe place always to put people.
Correct. Yeah, and what I try to kind of let people know is that what we know conclusively as a fact is that foster care is not a healthy system for children. That there is no statistic that states that foster care is a healthy system. We look at places like Baltimore, where people were having 4 to 5 higher incidents of sexual abuse when they were in foster care than out. In Indiana, it was 28 times more likely in a group home to experience sexual molestation and harassment than if you were within children that were at home, or the rates of removal for sexual abuse. And this isn't to say those are scary statistics, and I am not trying to demonize people who take children in and care for those children, because that's also not the case. I know that many people are doing it out of the well-intention of their heart. There's even a more pervasive and less discussed harm. It's really the harm of not being able to be with your own family and your own community.
That sense of belonging.
Even if you are a loving and wonderful foster parent, as many foster parents are, the reality is, if a child is taken away, and if we're looking at the structural integrity of this system, which is racist and classist, if they're taken away in a racist, classist, and sexist system, then there are ways that they could have been with their family. And what we know is that when children are on the risk of placement, so where there is some maltreatment, but they can be placed at home, statistically they do better, and statistically that option is offered more for white children than Black children.
People need to be more aware of what they're doing, and I really appreciate you sharing this. I just want to make, would you be willing to share something that you appreciate about Woodhull and the environment they set there? Because we would like to get more people to come out and experience your talks and other people's talks at Woodhull.
First of all, I'm so excited about the wide range of speakers and people that are going to be there. And even the willingness to have this conversation in a reproductive justice context is mind-blowing and cutting edge, and we're so excited to be a part of this conversation. And we're so excited to be a part of this conversation that's centering, women of color and talking about what's happening to them, that's centering people with disabilities and women with disabilities and talking about what's happening to them in particular in a way that is women-centered and people-centered and, and respectful to all of the things that are happening to our bodies and what's happening in our communities.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel the same way. Woodhull's been such a great resource and a place where I can get recharged by being around people, like-minded people that are encouraging each other. Is there, if someone wants to find out more about the foster care system and the policing of Black women, is there a good resource they can go to get started? Because, I feel like I'm pretty aware, and I feel like I should have a box of tissues here and a protesting sign.
Well, always make a protest sign. First and foremost, when I think of this work and this movement, I always think of Dorothy Roberts. She has been fundamental to creating the landscape that many of us are now just kind of echoing her sentiments and her words. And she's been doing this for years, and we're kind of adding into her legacy, her work, and her thought leadership. Also going to bronxdefenders.org, we have a family defense practice, and our family defense practice works incredibly hard at not only representing parents with integrity and support throughout this terribly difficult time, but also providing, when we can, ways to educate people about the system through, advocacy, know your rights, as well as different media outlets and discussing in panels of that nature.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. If you're watching this and you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. We'll try to get them answered for you. And Erin, thank you so much for your generosity and your passion. It's very touching.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.